21 years ago, the greatest superpower movie. that was not my movie debut. Yeah, right. Finish it, right? Get him off the stage. Superpowers, right? I was in college. I debuted as the long-eared gypsy. If you couldn't hear that, my superpower was that I could read and control minds. Long ears can hear really well. Control, anyways. And there was a possum cat in there, and there was the electric walnut. And electric walnut, his ability was that he was large amounts of static electricity, and his head was super hard. And then the possum cat was very tricky and fast, like a cat. He had cat-like reflexes, right? So what would your superpower be, right? Everyone has their phone. I guarantee they have it in their hand or close to them. I want you to text me. My number's on the screen here. Text me right now. Text me. What's your superpower? If you could pick a superpower, what would it be? All right? For me, I was a long-eared gypsy. I could read and control minds. So what is your superpower? I asked this at the Veterans Home this week. We were talking about superheroes and superpowers, and they had all kinds of different things that they wanted to become. They wanted to have as their superpower. So you're texting me all these amazing flying. Yes, that's a great one. Be able to fly, right? There we go. Animal magnetism. That's a great one. All right. Fantastic. All these great superpowers are coming in. And no matter what you say, it's going to always know what to say. That's a good one. Yeah. Well, it's one of the gentlemen, as I'm giving this, I'm kind of talking about what kind of my superpowers would be, how awesome it would be to be invisible, right? As a kid, I always wanted to be invisible because I was kind of picked on as a kid, so I thought, I just want to be invisible so no one will see me. And one of the guys says, I wish my superpower was being like Jesus. And of course, he says that. What everyone else says is just terrible, right? All your other superpowers make myself a fool in public. Hey, I do that all the time, right? I do that all the time. It's a great one. So we have these superpowers. Growing up, we had the Power Rangers, and they're kind of making a comeback a little bit. But I love the Power Rangers growing up, and to the point where my cousins and I, when we would go outside to play and hang out and do all that kind of stuff, everybody would pick a color of the Power Ranger. You had red, I think it was white, green maybe was one of the Power Rangers, yellow I think was one of them, and there was blue and pink, right? And if one of my girl cousins wasn't outside, they always made me be pink, right? I was always the pink Power Ranger for some reason. And I was okay with that after a while. You just kind of realize. And so we would pick all of these. We'd pretend to be the Power Rangers, and we'd get sticks and all these things and fight, and there are weapons. And as I was watching the Power Rangers as a kid, I always wondered, by the end of the episode, they would kind of transform into their little like robot thing, and eventually they would combine their superpowers, right, and become the massive Megazord. Thank you. And they've become this massive Megazord, and what would it do? It ended up defeating the enemy anyways in the end, right? My thought was, why not just create the big Megazord at the very beginning, right? But then the episode would be a lot shorter, and we wouldn't have this, And so that's kind of like, the whole idea of superheroes, right? You have this superpowers, and you're trying to create something maybe where you feel inadequate, right? Or maybe there's an oddity about yourself. We're kind of in this brand new series called My Superpower Is, right? And we're looking at kind of the gifts of the Spirit and what we've been gifted with, and how does that translate to who we are in our lives. And we're going to look at Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12 during this 3-week series. But let's look at Romans 12, verses 1 through 8. Since you have your phone out and you're texting me, why don't you pull up your Bible app, Romans 12, verses 1 through 8. And it says this: Also, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Because of the privilege and authority God has given me, I give each of you this warning. Don't think you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourself, measuring yourself by the faith God has given us. Just as our bodies have many parts, and each part has a special function, so it is with Christ's body. We are many parts of one body, and we all belong to each other. In his grace, God has given us with different gifts for doing certain things well. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, speak out with as much faith as God has given you. If your gift is serving others, serve them well. If you're a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. See, in this moment, Paul is trying to get their attention. I think that, I believe that when we are created, each one of us is given and has been given gifts and talents, right? And I don't believe that it's just for believers. I don't believe it's just for followers of Jesus, that those are the only people that have gifts and talents that God has given to them. We see this all over our community. We see this all over our country, that people have been given these amazing gifts, right? And they've been born with these things, and they're cultivated as they grow up. And sometimes they're used for evil. Sometimes they're used for things that aren't great. But you see people around you, you know people in our communities that these gifts are really well used. And Paul, I believe, is writing to the Romans here, and he's trying to get them to understand, like you have these gifts and abilities, and if you have these things, you need to use them the right way. You need to use them greatly, right? He's also probably writing because there's some infighting here, right? Maybe some people are saying, well, I prophesy, and so this is actually the best of the gifts, or someone says, well, I am a great speaker, and so I am the greatest gift. And he's saying that that's all one body. We're all here to help each other. We're all here to grow together, and they can't work one without the other. He talks in this moment here how they function together, they work together, and later in Romans in 12, he's talking about this idea that they have to function kind of in this relationship. And he's referring to this, but I think he's also maybe talking because they're a little bit out of alignment, right? He's talking because they're maybe not working in this relationship, and they need to realign the church, the believers, the followers, need to kind of realign their lives and how they're doing ministry, how they're living around each other in the way God has for them. And I believe that when we meet Jesus, when we start following Jesus, our gifts finally align with what we are created for, right? That idea that when we meet Jesus, when we meet the person that created us, that knows everything about us, that it finally aligns with what we were created to do, right? 5 years ago, I went to the chiropractor because my back had been hurting for quite a while, and it was I could only feel no pain when I sat perfectly still, right, in my chair at work. And so I would kind of sit there like this and kind of swivel back and forth whenever someone would come in the door to see me. And so eventually, after my stubbornness, I went to see the chiropractor, and he did some adjustments and kind of worked on my back a little bit. And he's like, "Oh man, you're just out of alignment. Your back wasn't right." And I've kind of done some adjustments, and I can tell you, after a couple of trips to see him, it improved greatly. And I think that's why what Paul is trying to get at here, he's like, you've got some gifts in this moment. God's given you these gifts, but I need you to kind of get your lives realigned, right? to make sure that if you are given the gift of prophesying, you need to do it with faith in God. You need to do this with the trust that God has given this to you. If your gift is to serve, then just serve others, right? Lead this moment, what God has called you to do. See, the problem comes in our lives when we say that people just need to profess to be Christians, right? That all you need to do is say this magical prayer, but really what God calls us to do isn't just to say this prayer. He calls us to follow me. See, he says that throughout Scripture, when he was calling the disciples to come apprentice under him, to be his disciples, that's what he was doing. He didn't say, come and be a little Christian. I want you to come and follow me. I want you to realign everything that you're doing into the way that I have for you, because it's going to change how you live your life. See, and Paul is calling the church to realign their lives, to get it right. He's asking them, I want you to take your gifts to the next level, to the level that you were created to be in. In this moment, Paul is asking them, in the first verse, he says, I'm urging you, I'm begging you, I'm pleading with you to live your life worthy of the calling. The NIV says that I'm urging you, I'm begging you to live your life in the view of God's mercy. And I think that kind of changes how I see it when I look at it like that when I live my life seeing the mercy that he has for me, it changes how I live my life, how I follow him in the daily moments. See, in a sacrifice, when they would sacrifice these animals, they would cut them and their blood would be spilled, kind of emptying them out. And he's sacrificing these, when they're sacrificing animals, it's taking everything out. And I believe that what God has for us is that he wants us to live our lives as a living sacrifice, so that we empty ourselves of everything that is us, everything that is our selfish desires, just to remove that moment and to have this infilling of his Holy Spirit, so that we are living the way he has for us. It's something different in our lives when the Creator gets involved. John Mark Comer says this: for Jesus, salvation is less about getting you into heaven and more about getting heaven into you. It's less about a transaction and more of a transformation. It's not just about what he has done for us, but also about what he has done, is doing, and will be doing if we apprentice under him. Paul's wanting them not just to say a prayer, not just to just have this conversion moment, but to have this following Jesus moment. When I was in my, I did like a semester unit as a chaplain at the University of Minnesota Hospital, and when I was there, it was about 3 months of this intensive 40 hours a week, where we would get together as intern chaplains, and we would talk about our feelings in a room. And then we would sit around in a circle, and the professor said, I can wait you out. I don't mind awkward silence. And so we would sit there sometimes for 20 minutes in awkward silence until someone spoke, right? And so part of our time there was also devoted to clinical work. And so I was on the cardiac unit, so I was a chaplain on the cardiac unit, and also part of our time there was we had to be on call. And this was at the University of Minnesota Hospital, and they had 2 hospitals. They had one on the east side of the river, and then the main hospital. And our job as chaplains, when we were on call, is we were in charge of the entire hospital. And so we would have a pager, and we would have our pager would be with us wherever we were at, and we'd also have to have our cell phones with us when we went home. And my first time being on call, it was a Friday night. and I had just finished with my 8-hour shift of working at the hospital, and I had been talking to my supervisor and asking him, what should I expect? Is this, my first time ever being on call, in charge of the whole hospital? He's like, well, it could be really quiet and you have nothing going on tonight, or it could be a whole lot of fun. It just depends on what happens tonight. And so he said, I want you to have yourself ready for this. You probably won't get a call right away. It'll probably be pretty quiet. Usually Friday nights are kind of quiet, at least for the beginning portion of it. And so I was like, all right. So I had my pager on me, and I was sitting in my office, and 5 o'clock hit, and all the other chaplains left. And it was like 5:02, my pager went off. And I looked at it, and I saw the number, and I hadn't learned kind of like where these places were yet. And so I got the house phone there, and I dialed the 4-digit number, and it came up, and I said, hi, this is Chaplain Ryan. Somebody at this line paged me, and they said, oh, hi, this is Nurse so-and-so, and I'm in the ICU, and we need you to come up right away. And so I was like, all right, this is it, right? My first time being on call. I called my supervisor, and I was like, what do I do, right? He said, go talk to the nurses, go up to the station, and you'll be fine. And so I went up to the ICU, and she had told me what room number it was. But before I went into the room number, I had always been kind of told my first few weeks there, go check in with the nurses, like go to the station, talk to them, get a rundown of everything that's happening in the room so that when you walk in, you're not going in blind, right? Because you want to know when you walk in there what's happening and what's going on. So I go talk to the nurses, and they shared with me that this was it was like a 65-year-old gentleman that was from North Dakota, and he had collapsed in the field, and they had brought him to the emergency room in his hometown, and they realized they couldn't do what he needed to be done, so they ended up airlifting him to the Twin Cities, and he was with us. And they thought that it was a heart issue, but he also potentially had a stroke. And so they had been doing some tests, and they realized that he needed to have some movement because he hadn't been responsive since getting to the University of Minnesota Hospital. And they said, we're not really going to go in unless we go in for surgery tomorrow morning unless we know there is some movement, unless we know there's some function. So I walk into the room, and I'm not sure if you've ever experienced this, where you walk into a room and it's just heavy, right? Anybody ever experienced that, where you walk into a room and it's heavy? You can feel, it's almost like when you walk out on a morning and there is dense fog, and the whole room just feels the weight of what's going on. And as I walked in, I could feel that heaviness. And straight ahead of me is my patient, this man. He's laying down in the bed. He has the stuff hooked up to him, monitors. At the foot of the bed is the wife standing there. Off to each side, flanking the bed, are their 2 sons. And as I walk in, I introduce myself. I'm Chaplain Ryan. I'm one of the chaplains here at the University Hospital, and I'm so sorry that we're here. Is there anything I can do for you? And she just would talk to me for a few minutes as we talked, and she filled me in again about kind of what's going on. And she says he's not responsive. They think that he had some heart issues and potentially a stroke, and they're telling us that unless there's movement, unless he moves his hands, opens his eyes, his feet, something, they're not going to go in and do any surgery tomorrow. So as we talked with the family a little bit longer, I went up to the head of the bed, and I was talking with them, and the sons came over and were holding his hands, and the wife was there with us as they were talking about him, sharing about him being a farmer, and he just was a worker, such a hard worker his whole life. And as we're talking, another gentleman, I can see him kind of walking past the room, and he comes back, and the nurse kind of walks in with him, and the The wife says that's his brother. And so everybody walks kind of towards the foot of the bed, and he comes in, and again, they kind of fill him in on what's going on. They let him know, kind of like, hey, here's the situation. And then he walks up on the right side of the bed. And he grabs his brother's hand. And he's holding it. And I'm off to the side, on the left side by the foot of the bed, and I can hear him talking to his brother. And the wife is up on this side of the bed, left side of the bed, towards his head. And the sons are kind of on either side, sitting in the chairs. And the brother just gets up next to his brother's head, holding his hand. And as he holds it, he's down by his ear. And he's saying, you got to do this. I need you to move. I need you to move your fingers. I need you to move your hands. You got to open your eyes. You got to do something. Do something, please. I am begging you. You have to move. He says, they're not going to do anything for you until you move. You have to do something. Please. I'm begging you. We finish in the room. My time is done. I pray with the family. I leave. I go back to my office. And I have to chart all this, right? I have to kind of like put in some narrative form charting so I know what, so the team knows what's going on. And I just broke down. Now, I had been in a room when someone passed away before. I had experienced it in the weeks leading up to my first on-call moment, but something about that moment just broke me. And looking at this passage here, Paul, I can't help but feel like that Paul is almost like he's looking at the church and saying, I'm just begging you. You have to see that your gifts are important. Your gifts matter. I am begging you. I am pleading with you. Please, I need you. In the view of God's mercy, right? You see God's mercy in the view of His mercy. I am begging you to offer yourselves as a living sacrifice. It's not just about saying, I'm a Christian. I already said a verse. It's about emptying yourself, allowing God to infill you with His Holy Spirit, and then following Him as an apprentice because you know God has something for you. He is begging you today. Paul is coming here saying, I am begging you in the view of God's mercy. Offer yourselves as a living sacrifice because your gifts matter. How I created you matters. I created you on purpose for a reason. And it doesn't matter that I am so happy that there are people here today that have gifts and use them to better our community. That's amazing. But in the view of God's mercy, will you follow Him? In the view of His mercy, will you become His apprentice and follow under Jesus and say, I want something different. It's not good enough just to know that I'm going to heaven. It's about following you so that our gifts around this room aren't just for us, aren't just to make our church stronger. It's about going into our community and making a difference. When I was in seminary, one of the professors in my very first class, he looked at our room of pastors and leaders of our churches and said, if your church left your community, would it even matter? If your church left your community and was gone, would they even matter? Would they even know you were gone? In the view of God's mercy, I am begging you to live your lives as a living sacrifice, to apprentice and follow under Jesus. Dallas Willard says this, the greatest issue facing the world today with all its heartbreaking needs is whether those who identify as Christians will become disciples, students, apprentices, practicers of Jesus, steadily learning from him how to live the life of the kingdom of heaven into every corner of existence. Would it matter? Paul is holding our hand in this scripture. He's holding and he's saying, I am begging you. Each one of us has gifts. I know it because I've served with so many of you. And so we're talking about this idea of these superpowers, this idea of kind of what is your superpower. Sometimes you might be thinking to yourself, I don't really have any superpowers. There's nothing in my life that God's really gifted me. Well, first of all, that's not true. You're lying to yourself, right? God has gifted each one of us with something special. What do you love doing, and what is a passion for you, right? And I just love serving people. I love making them goodies and snacks. I love to just take care of people. I love praying for people, right? I love interceding for them on their behalf. I love just to just get to know people and their stories, right? Those are the gifts that God has given you. And in 1 Corinthians 12, towards the end of the passage, he's saying, I have made some of you to be apostles and prophets and teachers and shepherds, right? We talked about this a few years ago. We had a whole series on all the different giftings that God has given us in the church and how we can work together in this amazing relationship today. We can change the world if we allow God to use us. We can change Marshalltown if we allow God to use us. If we live our lives as a living sacrifice. So today, my question for you is, what are you doing with your life? Maybe you're just kind of just like floating by and just kind of getting places with your life, and your faith is just kind of there. I want to challenge you to step in to an actual following Jesus moment where you change how you live your life, or that you learn from him, learn to follow his guiding and his love for your life. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, it says this, and so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Don't copy. Stop. Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Father, in this moment as we close here today, I just ask that if anybody here has been kind of just wrestling with what they have as a faith moment, that they are looking at following Jesus today, we want to pray with them. We want you to find a moment, Lord, to just dig into their hearts, Lord, that they would live the beginning of Romans 12, that they would live their lives as a living sacrifice poured out for you so that you can infill them with your Spirit so they can live as they were created for. Lord, go with us this day. Go with us as we leave here, as we impact our community, as we love those near us, as we live according to the way that you called us to.